So one of my most favorite things about being a UFC fan are the GOAT debates. Almost every sport has them. And within the UFC, in a recent interview by Conor McGregor, or with Conor McGregor, one of his many recent interviews leading up to his fight this weekend against Max Holloway, he stated that he believes truly that he is the UFC GOAT over John Jones. Um, I think, I've told you guys recently, because I've covered Conor a couple times recently in my videos, that Conor, in my book, and I believe for many other UFC fans' books, Conor is well outside the top 10 all time for many people. For various reasons, I think the most unanimous reason probably being the fact that he doesn't have a healthy amount of title defenses in comparison to fighters like George St. Pierre and John Jones. And I feel like that still stands. For the criteria for my list for all-time UFC fighters is influence, dominance, and record. And, when it comes to those three things being kept in consideration, I feel like it's fighters like John Jones, Demetrius Johnson, and George St. Pierre that rise above all others. And, Conor has the influence. He just doesn't have the dominance or the record, Conor hasn't dominated every fighter he's fought, and he doesn't have a squeaky clean record, He's had fighters who have shut him down. He's had fighters who have pulled off upsets, Fighters like, Dustin Poirier and Khabib Nurmagomedov have shut Conor down. They've destroyed Conor. Dustin may not have done it in his first fight, but in his last two fights, he's done it. He's shut Conor down. Sure, one of them has happened because of, in one of them, Conor lost because of a freak accident with his ankle snapping in half. But before the ankle snapped in half, he still got shut down by Dustin Poirier. John Jones and George St. Pierre. I mean, GSP was shut down, once or I think twice at most. But no fighter was able to really figure him out, and no fighter was able to really destroy his record or render him defenseless. And I just can't say the same for Conor. The only thing that Conor really shines bright in my all-time list is his influence. Conor is, one of, if not the most influential fighter of all time, at least in the world of MMA. He's the reason many people are MMA fans today, myself included. I became an MMA fan because of what I saw Conor was able to do in the octagon. That's the only reason I knew about the UFC so long ago, while I was in 6th grade, So, yeah, Conor's done a lot in the sport. I don't mean to belittle it, but he hasn't, in my opinion at least, done more than a John Jones, a George St. Pierre, a Demetrius Johnson, a Daniel Cormier, even a Khabib Nurmagomedov. I do rank Khabib higher than Conor McGregor, and Khabib doesn't have any title defenses either. The reason why I have Khabib over Conor is because of that sheer dominance aspect and how much I believe it outweighs the influence aspect. Khabib never lost a round. Sure, he fought, a fair amount of cans, and Conor did bring up a point about how even before the UFC, Khabib fought in a league that his father had heavy influence in, so a lot of those wins shouldn't really count either. I do agree with that. When looking at the UFC, Khabib doesn't have a lot of UFC fights in his overall record, so that does need to be looked at. My issue is that, my issue with Conor's statements about Khabib is that Khabib was still very dominant when he moved into the UFC. The UFC is a whole nother level or a whole nother caliber of competition in comparison to so many other fight organizations. And when Khabib made the move to the UFC, he shined just as much as he shined in those leagues influenced by his father. There was no difference. Khabib was still dominating people. People were still rendered useless in front of him, Conor included. When Conor and Khabib fought, Conor was ragdolled. He was ragdolled. He was even tagged by Khabib striking. You know, there was nothing Conor could do in there, and that's why I can't really rank Conor too high. Now, here's the thing, and this is what I hope Conor understands, is that there's still a very, very viable and openly present chance for Conor to become the UFC GOAT in the near future. He can very well still do it. He can jump 10, 12, 13 spots all time and become number one. The way to do it is to become the UFC's first triple champion. The way to do it is to call out Khabib's protege, Islam Makhachev, after beating Max Holloway this weekend. That's the way to do it. You know, Conor is going to be looked at very seriously all time if he doesn't do it. You know, even if he decides to stay at lightweight and win the lightweight title back and defend it a couple times, it's only going to put him maybe at top 5 all time. You know, that's where it's going to put him. It's not going to put him at top 1. Sure, Conor believes he's the GOAT, and that goes along with the whole Conor mentality. You know, that's what he's known for, being very boisterous and very confident. You know, some may say arrogant, but it's served him well over the years. It's made him who he is today, a star, a legend. You know, the most influential and entertaining fighter of all time in MMA. That's Conor. That's why his fight this weekend is going to be so big. I would argue probably even bigger than UFC Freedom 250. In my opinion, I think there's going to be more of a turnout for this fight because it's Conor McGregor, the Mystic Mac. The issue is the Mystic Mac hasn't been that effective throughout his history in terms of actual progression, actual domination, actual record building, you know, shooting for a high place in anyone's all-time list. Conor just hasn't been able to do it. So in comparison to Jon Jones, I mean, Conor even brought knockouts out. He said, oh, Jon, you know, I have more knockouts than Jon, and that should qualify me. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Khabib barely knocked people out, and he's pretty high up on that list. You know, Islam Makhachev submits people more than knocks them out. You know, he drops people, but he's submitting them more than knocking them out. And he's still very, very high in the all-time list. You know, very near becoming the next MMA GOAT without even becoming the first UFC triple champ. All Islam really has to do is rack up a few more title defenses, and it's because Islam has been dominating the lightweight division for more than a decade. So he's been racking up title defenses for more than a decade. That's what's needed if you really want to become the next UFC GOAT. So knockouts, they don't really make the fighter. They're not really included in my criteria, in my all-time list, because, you know, Derek Lewis has the most knockouts, I think, ever in the UFC. He just crapped the bed in his fight against Josh Hogan at UFC Freedom 250. And he's been known for crapping the bed in very important fights throughout his career. But no, he's got the most knockouts. He's the knockout king. No. I'm calling for him to be cut because of how much he underperformed in his fight against Josh Hogan. And he's got all these knockouts. They don't make the fighter. They don't help you in building. They may help you in building maybe influence and notability, two things that Derek Lewis does have. But Derek Lewis, I don't think even is top 30, 40 all time. You know, I'd have to really look. But off the top of my head, I think I could name 30 better fighters than him all time. Maybe even 40. And he's got all these knockouts, Derek Lewis. But he's, you know, they don't make the fighter. They don't build the legend. They help, again, get your name out there because, you know, the fans love knockouts. I love knockouts. But when you're thinking about, you know, greatness, sheer greatness and effectiveness in the history of the UFC, you got to think more, you got to think on a higher level than just knockouts. You got to think about win rate. You got to think about dominance. You got to think about influence. You know, all those coupled together create a genuine, uncrackable, all-time UFC fighter list. One that Conor McGregor, in my opinion, is very well still outside the top 10 of. You know, maybe nearing outside top 15. And I love Conor. I love what he's doing. He's just chatting. He's trying to build up, you know, excitement and influence and intrigue for his upcoming fight this weekend. So you can't blame him for trying. But, you know, this whole I'm the UFC GOAT stuff, it's in one ear and out the other of, you know, every UFC fan that isn't a diehard Conor fan. You know? I like Conor in a way. I respect what he's done. Okay, I won't go so far as to say I like him. I respect what he's done because I can't like him after, again, a lot of the really, really disgusting things he's done outside the octagon. But I respect what he's done, the body of work he's created. You know, since he started in the UFC, it still ain't top 10, in my opinion. I don't think it's top 10 in yours, you know, by general assumption. Let me know what you think.